Have you ever stopped to think about a really strange pattern that runs through religious history? For huge chunks of time, across so many different traditions, you hear stories of God speaking. Directly, dramatically. And then, it's like the volume gets turned down. The divine voice just gets quieter and quieter. Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive right into that historical mystery and try to figure out why this divine retreat seems to happen.
And that's the big question, isn't it? Why did God stop speaking? Why would a deity who once communicated so openly through prophets, visions, miracles, the whole shebang, suddenly go silent? Especially when you'd think humanity would need that guidance more than ever. It's a really profound puzzle, and it cuts right across history.
So to really get a handle on this, you've got to see history as two totally different eras. First up, you have the Age of Revelation. Think burning bushes, stone tablets, direct commands from the sky. It's an age of active, in-your-face, miraculous intervention. But then there's this big shift to the Age of Interpretation. And here, the focus moves away from new messages and onto old ones. It's all about sacred texts, human-led debates informing doctrines and councils. The action literally shifts from the divine to us humans.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting. This shift from revelation to interpretation, it's not some isolated event. It is a consistent historical pattern that we see happen across all the major Abrahamic religions. Let's just break it down real quick. So let's take Judaism. In the Hebrew tradition, God is a major character in the story, right? Speaking directly to figures like Abraham and Moses. But as you move forward in the timeline, that direct line starts to get, well, fuzzy. The messages become more symbolic, and eventually, the whole age of prophecy is considered to be over. In Christianity, it follows a really similar path. You have this peak of divine communication with the life and teachings of Jesus and his apostles, but after that initial formative period, the door to new authoritative scripture is slammed shut. The canon is sealed. The era of brand new revelation is done. The pattern is just as crystal clear in Islam. In fact, it's even more decisive. Revelation culminates with the Prophet Muhammad, who is known as the seal of the prophets. The Quran is seen as the final word. After him, that line of prophecy is officially, definitively closed. So look at that. Across these three massive faiths, you see the exact same arc, a period of intense communication, followed by closure. So if God stops speaking, what happens next? A vacuum is created, right? And something has to rush in to fill that silence. That something was human interpretation. And with it came brand new structures of human authority. You can really see it as a chain reaction. Step 1, direct revelation stops. Step 2, this creates a huge void of divine instruction. So step 3, to bridge that gap, human interpretation of the existing texts just explodes. And finally, step 4, to manage all of that interpretation, you need formal human authority. You get councils, clergy, scholars, the works. And this right here is where the theology as a discipline is really born. See, it's not about getting new information from a divine source anymore. Instead, theology becomes the management of what's already there. It's a system for trying to apply these ancient, finite texts to the endless new situations and problems that we humans keep coming up with. This quote just nails the entire shift perfectly. God no longer speaks. Humans speak about God. The whole conversation changes. It goes from being a dialogue with God to a monologue about God. That is a fundamental change in how information and authority flows. And what happens when you leave a bunch of humans to argue over interpretation without a final divine referee to settle things? Yeah, you get disagreement, lots of it. In fact, the biggest, most bitter theological disputes and schisms in history, they almost all happened after Revelation was said to have ended, as different groups fought over the correct way to interpret the very same sacred texts. But this divine silence, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It actually coincides with another massive shift in human history. A coincidence so profound, it really forms the central argument of this whole analysis. This is the aha moment. Here it is. This is the core idea. There seems to be this inverse relationship in history. At the exact same time that the divine voice appears to retreat and get quieter, human systems of knowledge and understanding begin to expand and get way more robust. The two trends are moving in opposite directions. So what do we mean by the expansion of human understanding?
Well, we're talking about huge developments, like the rise of widespread literacy, which suddenly allowed way more people to read and interpret these texts for themselves. We're talking about the development of historical consciousness, this new ability to see our own time as different from the past. And of course, the massive growth of scientific explanations for how the world works. It's almost like as our ability to explain the world grew, the need for a direct divine explanation started to recede.
So, the crucial point here is that this isn't just some minor historical detail. This turning point marks a fundamental, deep down change in the very nature of what it even means to have faith. I mean, just look at how stark the difference is. In the age of revelation, the source of authority was a direct, divine voice, and belief was all about having a personal encounter. But in the age of interpretation, authority shifts to a sacred book and its human interpreters. The very nature of belief changes too. It becomes about fidelity, about being loyal to a specific interpretation of that book. And that's the key takeaway, really. What we call faith today might be a completely different psychological and social experience from what it was back in an era of active divine communication. The object of faith has literally shifted from a voice to a text, from a direct encounter to a human interpretation. And this leaves us with a really provocative final question to chew on. In our modern world, a world without new prophecy, when we practice our faith, are we truly having an encounter with the divine? Or are we actually having an encounter with centuries of human thought, debate, and interpretation about the divine? It's a question that totally reshapes how we view the history of belief itself.